Hello, welcome to Are You Seeing This? I am Mo,
And I'm Sarah.
and today we're going to talk about vampires. Sarah, would you like to start?
Yes. Oh, I have so many thoughts. The original way that we talked about this was through like Vampire Diaries because I hate to say it, I'm a Vampire Diaries hater. And I feel like I can say that because I watched 4 seasons of it.
That is fair.
I got I watched, it might have even been 5. I watched so many seasons of that show trying to like it, and I just couldn't. So recently, I want to watch the Robert Eggers Nosferatu film, and we were talking about, like, I find Count Orlok very interesting as a vampire, the way that he's, like, because he ages, and he's just, like, really gross and rotting, but still alive, and that's quite literally, like, the curse of immortality. And I was, like, thinking about, I was like, oh, what's that other Willem Dafoe movie with vampires that also had interesting mechanics? And lo and behold, Willem Dafoe has been in, like, 3 vampire movies.
Good for him.
Daybreakers was the one I was thinking of, where he plays vampire hunters, and that one wasn't so great. But it was really interesting because the idea was, it was, like, capitalistic vampires that took over society, and they had, like, literal farms where they farmed humans. And that was how they got blood, but it was, like, similar to the way that, like, cage-free chickens are good. They were like, it's not as good as the ones in the wild. There's a whole thing, and the whole thing follows this, like, very attractive vampire who wants to become human. I don't remember if he was attractive. I just was like, that's a leading man. But the other movie Willem Dafoe was in was called Shadow of the Vampire. And that movie was like a fictitious retelling of the making of the original 1922 Nosferatu. And it's really interesting to me because, first of all, it's very hard to find. You can't, I think you have to, like, purchase it on Amazon. You need to either get a physical copy or find it through other means that may be available.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah. We respect copyright laws, of course.
We do. If the FBI is listening to this, we love the law so much.
Yes. I watched that movie before watching Nosferatu. I was not familiar with the lore. I just jumped right in and watched it, and the movie description and, like, when you find it online, they really bury the lead where they're like, this is a mystery, and it's about, like, the lead in this film that they've cast is getting way too into, like, character acting. So when the movie starts, it's so clear that the person who wrote it was just like, everyone's a caricature. The producer's super obsessed with money. The director's this, like, artsy guy way in his head who's, like, doesn't see people as people and is very like, this is my vision, and it's like whatever. So I was like, okay, so this is the OG, like, the movie came out in 2001, so I was like, this was like,
yeah,
this could have been my origin story for hating method acting. And I was so excited where I was like, finally we get to make fun of method actors.
I'm so happy for you.
That really wasn't a mystery to figure out, though, that, like, the whole crux of the film is that this director is so obsessed with authenticity that he has found a vampire, and essentially the themes and the theory of Nosferatu, where it's like, you know, this guy who goes to sell a home to this strange count ends up accidentally making a deal to, like, give him his wife, and the dude is just obsessed with his wife. That happens in the film with him becoming obsessed with the lead actress who plays Ellen in the film. So it's this very strange meta retelling. But the whole thing of the film is blurring the lines between who is the monster. Because the director's the only one who knows what's going on. And he keeps stating that he's, like, obsessed with, he's like, I'm granting you immortality by putting you on film in your old age. And, like, this dude doesn't care about that, this vampire. And it is kind of funny that, like, they go to film and, like, Willem Dafoe will just eat one of the crew members, and I was like, that's so weird. What's going on with our crew? That dude's missing, and his blood is gone. What's happening? And then, like, John Malkovich will be like, I told you not to touch my crew. like, because the first person he goes for the cinematographer, and then John Malkovich is like, I know that you don't get it, but I get it, and the cinematographer is, like, really fucking important. So I'm getting another one, and don't touch him. Like, why couldn't you touch, like, the script girl? Like, why'd you have to do my cinematographer? And he's, like, going on.
Not the script girl.
Yeah, he literally said that. And so, like, and the other thing about this movie is, like, there's, like, a few really interesting scenes where, like, one of the guys who I think he was, like, the writer, because they're all just like, we don't understand this Max Schreck guy, but he seems like a good actor. He really looks like a vampire, so, you know, we'll give him space for his artistry. And so there's this one scene where the writer's just like, hey, I'm gonna ask this vampire. And he, like, asks him all these questions because, like, Willem Dafoe finds Dracula and reads it, and he's like, that's really sad, because it's, like, this guy who, like, lost everything. He used to be revered as a king, and now he has to, like, go to Europe to spread vampirism because he's, like, lonely and sad. That's sad. And
oh, that poor rich man in Europe in the 1920s.
Yep. So there was this weird, like, there was this very strange, like, juxtaposition happening of this director who's obsessed with his craft, who's talking to, and, like, he's obsessed with making a film that, like, puts his name on the map. He wants to be one of the greats, and he keeps talking about, like, we have to capture it, and then it's this aging vampire who's very bitter, who's like, I used to be a king, and now, like, this dude's got me in this basement filming this movie. I don't know what that is. But there was one scene I thought was actually, like, very powerful and interesting, where they left behind this, like, film. It was, like, one of those, because it's, like, the 20s, like, hand crank, and the vampire watches a film of a sunrise, and because he'd never seen a sunrise before, because he's a vampire. So he's, like, standing there cranking, watching, he's like, wow. And so there were, like, pieces of that movie that were such an interesting, like, there is a person kind of still there, but then he's, like, a monster. But the key thing in this version, this take, our Ellen, who's supposed to, like, her whole thing is she sacrifices herself to save the town because, like, Nosferatu's actually, like, a plague. I looked it up and looked into, like, the origins, and he's meant to essentially represent, like, contagion, and that's why he has, like, all these rats, and then the rats bring plague. So he's, like, this representation of that, and so Ellen, there's a way to break the curse, and that's, like, with a self-sacrifice of, like, a young woman, but the whole thing is she has to, like, sacrifice herself.
Okay.
That's not really what happens in Shadow of the Vampire. It's very much like someone else is sacrificing others. Which is very interesting because then I watched the Robert Eggers one, and Ellen's, like, a full-fledged, like, fleshed-out character in Nosferatu 2024. And our Ellen in that is, like, there's just way more agency that she has, and, like, the story's pretty much the same. They've like, interwoven some other themes in there, but that Ellen was, like, much more aware and, like, participating in her fate as opposed to, and that was the point of Shadow of the Vampires. You have this director who's, like, orchestrating everything to capture it, and then it just goes so strange the way that it ends. But those were, like, the key differences in those themes. Was as I was watching them, you know, I was thinking, like, oh, so in the original, I look up, I'm like, in the original story, it's like Ellen sacrifices herself, and in this one, it's not like that at all. And it's just, like, very interesting because there's little pieces of each movie in that one. I thought it was an interesting take, but then I looked in how the actual Nosferatu was made, because I was like, where did this come from? Because I feel like vampires got sexy, and that was where originally we started this conversation, is, like, the Twilight, the Vampire Diaries, and Count Orlok is, like, disgusting. He's rotting.
Yeah. And, like, vampires were sexy before Nosferatu.
Yes. So I was like, what changed? So, like, It did occur to me
Is this going in the...
that there might be some anti-Semitism.
Yes, there it is.
And I'm just gonna say, it is about this, like, dude with a giant nose who's, like, got a strange accent off on a strange island who's buying real estate.
He is.
And threatening to move in and bring his weird ways and infect Germany.
And we've got the blood libel in there. Yup.
So that was one.
And to be clear to our listeners, in case you haven't heard another episode, we are of Jewish heritage.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Yes. So that is one thought, because he did have also a Jewish real estate agent.
Yep.
So apparently the director of Nosferatu...
Well, he could be a banker. I don't know. Could be worse.
He's well, that's true. So the OG, like, director, first of all, didn't know he was gay. Slay.
Oh, good for him.
So he was like, oh no, I, like, have Jewish friends, I love them, and I cast a Jewish guy to play the real estate agent because he's my friend, and I wanted my friend in the movie. So that's if we believe that.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I don't doubt that those are themes that were happening at the time. That's just one thing.
It's 1920s Germany. Yeah.
Another far more interesting thing. That director survived 8 plane crashes in World War I.
Wait, what?
Yeah, the guy who directed Nosferatu was in more than 8 plane crashes while dogfighting in World War I.
They really, the universe needed him to make this movie.
And he shows up, he's like, I'm making this film. So that was another thing. So the rats in the film. That was one of the things that led people to be like, this might be anti-Semitic, they, like, wrote it in nature. So there were a few other things that had happened up to that point that, like, kind of brought that, which was where you had the plague by rats. But I also didn't know that something that came up in World War I is that in trench warfare, rats thrive. Because it's, like, disgusting and gross and underground, whatever. And so that was another thing, was that a lot of the people in that film had served Germany during World War I. And so there was, like, this horrors of war that a lot of them had survived. And, like, that theme of self-sacrificing, like, was something a lot of them related to. And something else I thought was very interesting was Max Schreck was a real person who played the original Nosferatu. And they did say, like, he did not really like talking to other people. He kind of kept to himself. And I think that's what led to Shadow of the Vampires. This guy was like, oh, that dude was just a vampire. And that's why he didn't want to talk to anyone. And it is, like, an interesting concept. But it was because he suffered from PTSD, but there was, like, no resources for him at the time. And everyone was like, yeah, that dude, like, saw some shit. And so he kind of, like, he did the film and, like, you know, but he didn't really want to talk to anybody while doing it. So I thought that was really interesting that was such a strong theme. And I do also want to say the cinematography in Shadow of Vampire was incredible. It was so good because you'd watch them film the scene with their cameras from the 20s, and it would literally transition from, like, I think they still filmed it on film in 2001, probably in the late 90s. And then it would transition to, like, the 20s camera. And then when the scene's over, it would transition back. And so you were going from, like, black and white to color in the movie, but it felt really natural. And it's just, like, it was so... I love movies, like, about movies. Because then there was also a whole thing about how, like, Shrek was saying, like, which also Shrek and Shadow of the Vampire and the film Shrek came out in the same year, and I just need to say that.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I noticed, which I thought was so funny.
We'll put that in the Spotify description.
Yeah, yeah. We're talking about both Shreks. The vampire in Shadow of the Vampire is like, I'm not getting on a boat. I don't want to do that.
Water icky.
So they had to physically build a boat on land and then film the scenes to make it look like he was on a boat, because he was, like, all about authenticity. He, like, went and got a real vampire. He was like, no, we have to film at sea. And then the vampire's like, no, you guys travel by air now. Just take me by air. I'm not getting on a boat.
I would do that, too.
So, like, yeah. So there's parts of the movie that are, like, kind of funny, but it's also, like, it did get, like, very dramatic. It did actually become a horror towards the end, which was very good. So those were the themes in that film, very tied to, like, what was happening at the time in the 20s. And then the new Nosferatu, I think they gave Orlok a mustache to detract from the anti-Semitic.
No Jew has ever had a mustache.
Of the OG.
Definitely not in my family.
No, not like this.
You haven't.
This was such a.
You haven't seen my family pictures.
Interesting. No, because I think it's because, like, Bill Skarsgård plays him, and he's, like, the most Swedish man, that the mustache just gave it a different fin. I still am undecided if I take the mustache seriously or not. Yeah. But that Nosferatu was so much more about, like, sexual desire, where it was, like, Ellen in that film, her whole life had been, like, sort of dabbling, like, again, it wasn't, like, her choice, but it was established in the film that Ellen has always had, like, a relationship with the occult where, like, she's kind of not always here. She, like, sometimes goes to other realms. And so she's kind of... She tells her husband, she's like, don't go, or death himself will come for us. And he goes, honey, this is a big sale. I can buy us a house. And then, you know, the movie ensues. So if the man had just listened to his wife... So many
things could be avoided in life if men just listened to their wives, yeah.
Yes. But what was also discussed in the film, which was Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, I don't quite remember what his role in the town is, but the relationship between Friedrich and Ellen is very interesting because she's very much an outcast and is only treated positively because of the person, like, she married and because they were friends with someone who was wealthy, that then he, like, kept shit under wraps and, like, didn't really let it get out, and they didn't send her to, like, the madhouse where, like, a lot of people would go. So but even then, like, throughout the film, the tension between the two of them is very much a commentary on, like, the social standards of Ellen being, like, a young, beautiful woman and then acting in this way that is seen as, like, unwomanly due to her shame, which is Nosferatu. So that's fascinating and very well executed in that film. Another one where the cinematography was, like, very beautiful. But I like that a lot because they also showed us, like, Thomas was stupid, but he was a good husband, and he did really love her. And, like, she really loved him, and their love was very pure. So it was just, like, very sweet. I don't know. That was a sweet thing. It was a horror film. Nosferatu was disgusting. They did a really good job of showing him literally just rotting off the bone. It was, like, such good character design, and the costuming was beautiful. I love when gothic horrors, like, go for it with the costuming.
Crimson Peak, I think, does it.
They put Lily Rose Depp. Yes, Lily Rose Depp steps out in this, like, purple satin striped dress with, like, these crazy puffs and, like, all of these layers. And I mean, she is, like, a high fashion model. She has, like, that face, but she didn't feel out of place in the film, which is, like, at least to me, she didn't. And that's hard to find in period pieces now because I feel like a lot of actors and actresses are getting work done that makes it very obvious what generation they're from, like, what year they live in. And she didn't have that look, so that all just, like, worked really well. But I also really enjoyed the way that it explored that theme. But then also, like, Willem Dafoe's character was a little weird and out there. And there was a lot of, like... They gave you a little bit more details about, like, Nosferatu in his... explicitly, like, as a demon in his relationship to the occult. Which was a theme in the original Nosferatu that, like, wasn't touched upon in Shadow of a Vampire. Because Shadow of a Vampire was, like, a horror movie about making a movie. And then I found out apparently that that's a hallmark of German horror and filmmaking, is that they are far more willing to explore the occult than other cultures might be.
Interesting. Did not know that.
So that's what the article I was reading said. So I don't want to offend any Germans.
Put the article in the description. They can yell at the article.
Yeah, but it was, it did also, like, kind of, I mean, at least for, I think America is definitely one that, like, doesn't really delve too much into the occult, and if you do, like, it's a little bit taboo, you know, because we had Satanic Panic and all that.
Because there's always, a Christian, an extremist Christian group waiting in the American shadows to be like, but you're trying to kill the children, aren't you?
Right. So it was, I like both of those interpretations of Nosferatu. I thought they were they were unique in their own ways. I was just gonna say, towards the end of Shadow of the Vampire, John Malkovich's character, basically the vampire goes sicko mode, and he's just filming it. And as people are, like, dead, he's like, I need a new script person to, like, go put this thing back here, and he literally says, if it doesn't happen in frame, it didn't happen. And it was just so interesting to see this, like, suddenly warped perspective of warped reality. Because then there is a character in the new Nosferatu, like the real estate agent. He like goes mad and is, like, obsessed with the vampire because he's been touched by, like, the shadow of the vampire and, like, loses himself completely. So I appreciated that element was still there, even though our Ellen literally, I think, only had, like, 3 scenes in the movie. She didn't say much. She was not a character, you know.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, even for 2001, I felt like that was a little interesting, that she had nothing. So it was nice to, because I watched that and then the Robert Eggers one, it was really nice to see Ellen as a character.
Women's agency. Yeah.
She also wasn't just meek and mild. Like, it is established she's, like, physically small, and she's a little bit, like, she is on the softer side and, like, kinder. But then there are times throughout the film where she, like, stands up and, like, won't take certain things. So I did appreciate that she wasn't just, like, strong and outgoing or meek and mild. Like, Willem Dafoe's character even says that because she's, like, kind of quiet and small, like, demons tend to seek out people like that because they're easier to, like, haunt and all of that. But she, throughout the film, like, shows that she's a strong person. So I appreciate that, because I feel like strong women are always shown a certain way, especially in vampires, you know, in whatever, that genre. I feel like the women are always shown as, like, vampires happen to them.
Ooh,
and while that definitely was something that was present in Nosferatu, there was still something Ellen could do. Mm-hmm. And she chose to do that to, like, protect the people that she loved. Which brings me to the Vampire Diaries.
I just want to say one thing about vampires.
Go for it.
So, like, just to jump off what you were just saying, because I feel like, obviously, vampire folklore has been around for thousands of years. But what we now have our current idea of the vampire, of this very sexual being that takes your blood. Like, that really was born out of, like, the Victorian period. And the Victorians were famous for being so extremely restrained on not just externally but internally, and really, like, taking any sort of natural human emotion and saying, nope, we don't do that, that's not proper. And so out of this, and at the same time you have what they called consumption, where, you know, people get very ill and they get very pale and they cough up blood, and strangely they considered that, like, the way you looked when you were ill very beautiful. And so you have that going on, and then you also have these vampire novels. Like, obviously we know Dracula most famously, but there's also The Vampire John Polidori, and also Carmilla. And just, you have this, like, real feeling in society of, obviously human beings naturally want sex, and then there's also all this blood happening, all this blood. There's all these, like, there's this disease going on that really makes you aware of your blood, of losing your blood.
I did just want to say, like, that's a good point, because, like, in the new Nosferatu, the way that the self-sacrifice, and even in the original, the way that Ellen's self-sacrifice is framed is they speak of it as if it's seduction, but it is letting him feed on her. And I thought it was interesting some of the ways that they depicted that in Robert Eggers, because it very much was, like, sexual in some
Yeah.
ways. Like, that was a bit of a freaky movie.
And
to be to be frank, she was a bit of a freaky movie.
And I think this is the thing, when you have any sort of sexual restraint on people, is what we have next is once you get sort of like any sort of inch of freedom, what it tends to turn into is men get to be free with their sexuality, and women have the sexuality happening to them. And you definitely see that happening a lot in a lot of vampire depictions, going back to Dracula, but also happening with the Vampire Diaries, as you are about to tell us.
Yeah. I don't want to get too into the weeds of Vampire Diaries, because there's, frankly, so much happening in that show that I could go on for so long about.
If we get 500,000 subscribers on Spotify, Sarah will do a deep dive into the Vampire Diaries.
Yes. So what I really want to focus on for this is the difference between the books it was based on, which were written in the 90s, and the CW show that came out like around the 2010s. Mainly the difference in how Elena Gilbert was written. So in the 90s, when the books were written, we had Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and even in Buffy, like, the vampires were not, like, they were hot, but they had a vampiric form, and they were, like, they explicitly said vampires are demons.
Yeah, and this was also 1990s is when we have the Interview with the Vampire, right?
Yes. So, like, vampires are sexy, but they're not like Twilight. The show, clearly based on Twilight. There's a lot in the show that's inspired by the Twilight films. But in the books, Elena was an incredibly different person than she was on the show. She was, like, blonde, popular, mean girl. And she was very mean-spirited.
Wow.
And another thing, they really took the teeth off this book series. I haven't read it, and I'm thinking about it. I might actually get into it. There's also a whole drama about the person who wrote it. She wrote, like, 3 complete books in the 90s that were, like, a full arc. And then the show picked up, and people were interested, and I think she wrote one more book that I've heard was also good. And then the publishers had ghostwriters write more of the series under her name. Yeah. So, heartbroken for her, but in her original, that was very good. So in the show, we have the Salvatore brothers, Stefan and Damien? Oh my god, I forgot his name. I think it's Damon.
I only watched the Jenny Nicholson summary of the show, so all I know is there's hot guy who's mean and hot guy who's nice.
Frankly, Mo, I don't think you should watch. I think you have no business watching that show.
I really, don't. This isn't keep me to the lesbian vampire media. Yeah. That's really my thing.
So in the show, the brothers end up becoming vampires, I believe because they were shot by their father. Trauma. Oh. And I believe that they were around in, like, the Civil War era. In the books, they are from the Italian Renaissance, so they're, like, older.
Oh. That's more interesting, in my opinion.
These fuckers are vampires because they killed each other in hand-to-hand combat. And that is how they died. And that's the other thing.
I love that. That's way more interesting.
In the show, they're, like, brothers who are at odds because they like the same girl, but also they, like, approach life differently. Like, Stefan's kind of they refer to him as a vegetarian. He drinks animal blood. He won't touch human blood. And
it's the grumpy sunshine.
So they made there's a really dumb thing written into the show where it's because he has this Ripper side to him where if he, like, has human blood, he becomes, like, crazy. That is not present in the book. He just does it because that's, like, the kind of person that he is.
The writers were running out of ideas.
Yeah. But also, like, I also have a theory about that. So, and then Damon's kind of just, like, a little bit more brutal. But in the show, it's like they were killed by somebody else. There's this brotherhood that exists, and then later when Elena leaves the show, because Nina Dobrev left, they are seen as getting along much better, and they're able to bridge the gap between them and return to brotherhood. The brothers are so brutal to each other in the book, they simply are not capable of returning to brotherhood. And honestly, I like that. I like that so much, brother.
Was there ever any brotherhood if they, like, killed each
Well,
other?
that's the thing, is that there was at one point maybe, but they were always very brutal, very at odds. They were very, like, they were very much vampires as monsters. Mm-hmm. So in the show, we have Elena Gilbert, who, like, she's a brunette. She's, like, dark eyes. And she is
grieving.
The kindest, sweetest, little docile girl. And her parents just died.
Ooh.
In the books, her parents had died years before, so that was still part of her, but it wasn't as fresh as it was in the show, and in the show they gave her survivor's guilt too. So she's like this poor little victim, whatever, who Stefan like scoops up and takes care of. Her best friend, Caroline, is a blonde kind of mean girl, and they're frenemies at the start of the show. Caroline ends up being turned into a vampire by Damon, I can't remember his name. I think it's Damon.
D-Dog.
I don't know why, for some reason. I mean, to be honest, I find him a little off-putting. I don't like him too much. And I think it was silly that in the show, spoiler alert, she picks Damon. I don't know why she would do that. Anyway.
Okay, wait, real quick. This reminds me of a story so I read
yes.
this teen series called, I think the first book is called The Summoning, and it's by Kelly Armstrong. And this follows, it was like at the vampire craze, but the main character, I think her name is Chloe, she's a necromancer, and she sees ghosts at school and has a freak out, so they're like, we have to send you away to this group home. And so at the group home, it's
always a fucking group home.
There's this werewolf guy who's very hot, but of course the mean, grumpy, bad boy. And there's his brother, who's just a really nice guy. I think he turns out to be a wizard or something at the end. There's no vampires in this. The point is that it was that typical, there's two brothers, one's really mean and grumpy, but he's so hot. And then there's just a really nice guy. And I remember at the time a friend was like telling me, had recommended this series to me, and I read it. And then I was like, I don't get why she chose the hot, grumpy guy at the end. She should have gone with the nice guy. And because I didn't know I was a lesbian yet. And my friend was just like, but he's hot. And I'm like, so? Anyways, you're right. I shouldn't watch.
But also that doesn't even work for Vampire Diaries because they're both hot. Like, Stefan is also hot. He just doesn't have electric blue eyes.
He's not mean to other people, but nice to her only. That's really the key here.
Yeah, and, like, in the books, she chose Stefan.
Mm-hmm.
In the books, like, she kind of, like, was into Damon for a bit, but, like, really it was Stefan. That was, like, it was in the book established that they had, like, a soul connection. I sound like one of those TikTok tarot readers now. Your next soul connection coming in. His name is Stefan Salvatore, and he's a vegetarian.
And your ex is going to come back during Mercury retrograde.
Oh my god. You guys, there's currently a separation happening. You may be in separation with this person.
It's crash out time.
But they're still thinking of you. Oh my god.
It's time to crash out.
And all the comments are like, I claim that he comes back to me. And I really, whenever I see that in the TikTok tarot reader comments, I really just want to comment and be like, girl, stop. Girl, don't ask for him to come back. You've been gifted with peace and silence. Don't sit here like, claim this, I hope he comes back to me, I miss him so bad. Girl, stop.
I really wish they could just be honest and be like, this Mercury retrograde, you're going to forget your password, you're going to try and reset it, and when you change it to a new password, it's going to tell you it can't be the same as the old password. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, or you're going to read your email and you're going to think that you got everything that you were supposed to deliver in that work project, and you're going to realize that you didn't go to slide 2 of the PowerPoint and you didn't see that graphic you were supposed to put in your rendering. So now they're going to call you the next morning as soon as you get online and be like, hey girl, you missed half of my project. And now you're going to have to do your work over and over again. Anyway,
vampires.
So in the books, there's like some key changes. One being, Stefan was kind of a vegetarian, but he fed from Elena a lot. And it was seen as this very intimate thing that they engaged in. And that was a way of them connecting to each other, even though he, like, didn't primarily feed on humans. He fed on her because they were, like, in love, which is interesting.
I mean, it's a
But
metaphor for it. The fang goes into the neck. It's a metaphor for sex that the Victorians had because they couldn't have actual sex in their books.
But it's something that they took out of the show. Like, if it happened between them, it was seen as, like, almost an act of violence against Elena, if it happened, where...
Mm-hmm. Because they're not married yet.
Well, it was sort of more like he couldn't control himself.
Which is, yeah.
And that was why he didn't feed on human blood. But, like, it was very stupid. But I really think that Twilight came out, and the showrunners were like, well, there's this book series called The Vampire Diaries about these teenage girls, whatever. We want to base it on her, but this one, she's not like Bella. She's not quiet and docile and going to be, like, taken by this old-ass vampire. And another thing, too, the relationship between Caroline and Elena. Because Caroline is frenemies with her in the show. To be honest, I do judge Elena for still considering Damon Salvatore because of how he treated Caroline, where they were, in the show, they were supposed to be sisters. Like, that was their bond, was that they were, like, sisters. He, like, dates Caroline to get closer to Elena while Elena's, like, in an entanglement with his brother. And then when he's done with Caroline, like, turns her into a vampire. And then just, like, leaves her and, like, acts like she was nothing.
Trash.
And trash. Weirdly, this makes Caroline a great person. Because Caroline acted the way that she did towards Elena and everyone else because she was deeply insecure. And becoming a vampire changed her perspective on things and basically erased her insecurities.
Oh my god.
So Caroline is, like, beloved in the fandom and considered, like, one of the best characters in the show. And I agree. I do think she's one of the best characters in the show. But then they're just, the frenemies thing is gone. In the books, Caroline and Elena grew up together, were BFFs, get to high school, are in their mean girl bitchy phase. Through her encounters with the supernatural, Elena learns to become a better person, more empathetic, more compassionate to people. But her and Caroline are frenemies the entire time and are not really able to, like, get over this thing between them because they're, like, on separate journeys, learning separate things, and, like, their paths cross, but they are more to represent, like, growing up together and then growing apart. So there's a little bit more to it there. There's one final change that I think in some ways worked better for the show, but they really did it a disservice. Bonnie Bennett in the show, she was played by Kat Dennings. She was the only black actor on the cast. Yeah. She was treated really terribly. She was a witch. In the books, she was based on Bonnie, who was super fair-skinned, red hair, like an Irish druid. And she ends up with Damon because he, like, it's established in the book that he kind of sees her as, like, this little kind of a bit of, like, an innocent, fragile thing that can't really care for herself. And so he's, like, protective over her, where he's like, okay, leave Bonnie alone, okay? She's just chilling. She's a druid, sure, but, like, leave her alone, okay? Sure. That's, you know, chill. And then they end up, like, they're, like, soulmates. They find out that they're, like, got a little soul connection. In the show, Bonnie Bennett is far stronger, and there was only one season where they really kind of, like, gave them a shot, but they wouldn't go for it because the fans really wanted Elena and Damien, whatever, to end up together.
Because racism, too, I'm guessing?
Well, also the actors were dating at the time. It was, like, a whole thing. Like, Nina Dobrev and Ian Somerhalder were dating, so it was, like, this... It was sort of like a MJ Spider-Man curse thing where everyone, like, really wanted them to work out.
Wait, real quick, this reminds me of something from Supernatural. So. The actor for... Yes. Jared Padalecki actually met his wife on the set of Supernatural, but then they like killed off his wife.
Yeah, she played Ruby.
Yeah, they killed off his wife specifically because they got together and they were like, no, this is too cheesy. We can't have this. Which I think says a lot about the writers and creators of that show. But they actually made it. They're still together as far as I know. So, I mean, good for them.
And then, like, also, I think Jensen Ackles met Daniil, his wife, through that show, too, because she was, like, a producer.
Oh, good for him.
They were, first of all, gorgeous couple.
Mm-hmm.
They're, like, very cute, still together. They seem very, very lovely. So, there's, I don't know, a lot happening on that set.
Anyways, Vampire Diaries.
Vampire Diaries. Bonnie in the show is way just stronger, and, like, she's, like, fixes shit. And no one's really there for Bonnie.
Because of the racism.
Like, yeah, so, like, shit goes wrong, and then once a season, you know, Kat Dennings is, like, Miss Bonnie is going through generations of trauma.
Oh my god.
Because the fact that she is, like, a black witch is a factor in the show. Like, the persecution of, like, black Americans, which I think is so funny that, like, the writers were so close.
Kat Dennings?
They were so close. Kat Dennings was the actress. Or, yeah.
Kat Dennings?
Am I wrong? Oh. No, hold on. I know this. It is Kat.
I was like, I know that name. That is not the face that name goes to. Or that is not...
Kat Graham.
Kat Graham.
It's Kat Graham.
Different cat.
I kept mixing up my cats, but yeah. And you know what? While we're here, I'm looking up that Salvatore Brothers name.
Is it Damon? Damon Salvatore does not sound like a name.
I feel like... Is Damon. It is Damon.
That does not sound like a name from the American South. Like,
no, because they're supposed to be from the Italian Renaissance.
His real name should be like Daniel Samuelson. And Steven should be Edward or something. No, what's Ernie? It should be like Ernie.
They should have been
or something. Ernie. Yes! That would have been way more realistic.
But yeah, I just, you know, the changes that happened between the, like, book and the show, I think also showed how, like, the tides changed on the themes that were being considered, because, like, I remember the CW at that time and the kind of stuff that they were pumping out, and it was very much, like, aimed towards younger women, very, like, romancy. So I understand why they took the teeth out of it, but then it, like... It kind of dumbs down a lot of the very interesting things about having vampires in your story, like...
Yeah, I mean, vampires are always going to be, at least currently, like, power dynamics within a relationship, how those power dynamics can relate to society, and also sex, just plain and simple. But also how society frowns upon any sort of sexual relationship, frowns upon sexual expression, and so you end up having... these expressions of it. And because society is still so inherently heteronormative and with these very hard and strict gender roles, even when we do have an attempt at sexual expression, we still have to have it within that paradigm of man strong, man powerful, woman weak, woman submissive. And so you end up with Vampire Diaries and all the other vampire TV shows and books where man strong, woman weak, man vampire, woman gets bitten by man vampire.
Right.
You know, which is why I read lesbian vampires.
That was another really fascinating thing about Shadow of the Vampire is it's established that that version of Nosferatu was turned by a woman vampire. And I heard it was cut from the movie, but originally, like, he did the film because he wanted to find her. Because he, like, was very taken by her, and then she just, like, she dipped, she ghosted him, and then he realized that actually, like, the type of immortality he had was his body would age, but he would still be alive, so he's, like, disgusting. So he was like, well, if I do this movie, I might find this girl, she might see me and recognize me. But I thought that was very interesting, too, that was, like, I guess a bit of a subversion of expectations, but not really. I don't know, because, like, in Buffy, that was a big thing that, like Spike was saying they think very carefully about who, like, I think it was Spike, who doesn't like turning people into vampires just because he doesn't know if he'll like their personalities, and then you're stuck with them forever. So, like, that was a thing for him.
Fair.
But it is established, like, there is a level of carelessness and lack of empathy with turning people where, like, you basically, you curse them and then you abandon them.
Yeah, I mean that makes me think of there's this one famous vampire lesbian book, The Gilda Stories by Jewel Gomez. And in that story it starts with this it starts in the 1850s, and our protagonist is we never really learn what her original name was, but she's a runaway slave. And she kills a bounty hunter in self-defense, and she's rescued by this vampire lady who runs a brothel. Vampire lady is named Gilda. She brings the girl into, like, her little vampire family. And eventually, like, at this point, elder Gilda has decided she is done. She wants to die, but she received the name Gilda from the vampire lady who turned her. So now that she is ready to leave, she wants to give her name and her vampire powers to this girl. And so it becomes like this cycle. So then, like, vampire lady gives her the vampire powers and her name, so she is now Gilda, younger Gilda, main Gilda. Elder Gilda leaves. Her, like, main girlfriend, her, like, wife is there and is, like, obviously mad that elder Gilda has left, and now she has to, like, teach main Gilda how to be a vampire. But that story had a very interesting idea about vampirism where, like, you can choose whether or not to kill people when you feed off them, and you can feed off them in a way that leaves them with, like, happy dreams or something like that. And if you, like, pack your graveyard dirt into your dress or whatever you're, like, walking with, you can still walk far away. And, like, it was this but it was like this very interesting turning point, very much in conversation with other with other vampire stories about power and control, and how that changes when your vampire is a black woman who began life as a slave. And it goes throughout history where, like, we see 1890s California and, 1920s, 1950s, 1980s, and then it goes into, like, the future and what vampires will be doing in the future after, like, an apocalypse happens of some sort. And she has this, so it's a very interesting story that really is in conversation with the power dynamics that usually come into vampire stories.
I liked that. I really like the idea of, like, passing the mantle on and leave it, like, because then it's like Dracula not being a specific vampire, but there's, like, several Draculas. I really like that theory. Because also imagine if there's, like, I don't know, some other immortal creature that's like, oh yeah, I knew Gilda back in the day. And they're like, this is Gilda. And they're like, hold on. Who are you?
That's not my Gilda.
That's not my Gilda. That's, like, such an interesting look at evolution, and, like, yeah, that's so interesting. And then the, like, being able to choose if you kill someone or not. That was one thing about the new Nosferatu that I was a little lost on, is, like, it's established that she has met him before and that he had fed on her. So I'm a little bit like, and I don't know if I'm just, like, taking the fun out of Nosferatu, but I'm like, why did Ellen have to die? Why?
I feel like because, she's the young white virgin in a vampire story, and I mean, like, in the original Dracula,
she wasn't a virgin.
Oh, okay. Well, in the original Dracula, there's Lucy, who has her 3 suitors, and so she dies, but Mina Harker, who is a good wife, does not die. And so there's always been a bit in vampire stories. I mean, it's a story about relationships between men and women, and you're always going to run into that Madonna whore complex in those, where you can have the lady who does fun things with men, but she has to die for it, and you have the woman who doesn't do fun things, and therefore she gets to live.
It was
your average serial killer slasher film dynamic, too.
Because there is, in the new one, there is another, like, good wife who does die. So I don't know. It was, I don't know if I just got, I don't know if I'm just like not following themes, but I guess it's just the like, that's the legend, is that he has to feed from her all night until day breaks, and then when the sun shines is like what kills Nosferatu. So that's supposed to be like what breaks the curse. So I guess that's it. But the night is so long. I was
that
like watching
me of another
the sun go down, and like the whole thing that happens in that movie, and like our husband tried to get back to her by daybreak, and I was like, this feels like they're assuming that the night is so long and so much has happened, but also like it feels like nothing happened. That was the one thing I struggled with, was like, this is supposed to be happening all night, and then you follow something else going on. I'm like, there's no way they did this all night. There's no way it took them all night to do this. And then like you can see the chapel that Thomas went to from their home. There's no way it took him that long to return. Either Thomas needed to be working on his cardio. Like, if you don't have your cardio up, are you ready to be married to a bitch who uses the occult? Like, why are you dating witchy baddies if you can't run back to them to stop her from being fed on until the first cockerel of the morning?
You are so right.
And then another fun shout out, just last thing about that movie, best line of the entire movie. She would sleepwalk and have these like crazy visions and like destroy the room. And so Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, to like prevent her from destroying his house, would tie her up at night. And so Willem Dafoe's character comes in and sees this and goes, untie her, why are you doing this to her? Like, she can't control this, let her go. And he goes, but she shall rave all night if we do not. And then Willem Dafoe turns around and goes, then rave she must.
Rave.
I was just like, and it came and the music swelled, and I was just like, 365 Party Girl, just like turning on the Charlie XCX.
Yeah!
I was like, then rave she must.
But anyways, jumping off on that about the folklore of like, he has to feed on a chosen one. This reminds me of another lesbian vampire book. This is just going to be me recommending lesbian vampire books. But anyways, this is...
Do that.
House of Hunger. God. Okay. So...
Oh.
Okay, so the folklore you were just talking about having where the count has to feed on her for a certain amount of time, and she has to be the chosen one. Reminds me a lot of House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson, where...
I do just want to say, it was about his infatuation with young women, because it didn't just have to be her. Okay. It was just that he could access her easier because of her, like, weird interactions with the spirit world.
So House of Hunger, so the main character is Marion. So this takes place in a fantasy realm, but it's very much like a gothic, dark fantasy type world. So she has like this terrible life of poverty and misery, and in the north, the northern lands, there's these aristocrats with these different houses. You have House of different things, and the main big one is the House of Hunger. And each of these houses has blood maids who give their blood to the aristocrats. And they never use the word vampire, but they're very clearly vampires. Because, like, historically, vampires are depicted as aristocrats, and it's a metaphor for aristocrats taking from their people and sucking the life force out of the land. But anyway, blood maids give their blood to aristocrats in the isolated, dark, and cold north in exchange for a life of comfort. And then they get to have a paid retirement once they age out, because this is traditionally only like teenagers and early 20-somethings are blood maids. And so Marion becomes a blood maid. She's brought to the House of Hunger, and she meets Countess Elizabeth, who's very beautiful but also very intimidating. And Marion is like immediately swept away by this beautiful, gorgeous, intimidating, strong woman. There's several other blood maids ahead of her, and there's like a hierarchy where you have first blood maid, second blood maid, etc. She's like fifth or sixth. But Elizabeth quickly like loves her, and so she becomes first blood maid. She jumps ahead, which of course creates strife with the other blood maids.
This is reminding me of the politics of concubines in the Bible.
Yeah.
I hate to, like, pull that reference out, but I'm like, I read this in the Old Testament.
Listen, you know it, you should pull it out and use it when you can. But basically, like, the story, Lisbeth is not who she appears to be, and basically, slight spoilers. She is, like, her origin, her ancestor that founded the House of Hunger is, like, actually some sort of weird creature that came out of the ocean, who, in order to be sustained on land, has to, like, who has, married humans and, like, birthed humans, but all of these people who originally come from this guy have to feed on human blood to be sustained. And the idea, what she was told by her father, who was a terrible person who abused her, but what she was told by her father is that you have to find, like, your chosen one to feed off of, and then you'll be sustained, basically. And she believes Marion might be that for her. But also Marion is like, you're killing my friends. This is bad. We gotta get out of here. But of course, Lisbeth is not going to let Marion go that easily. Yeah, so that's what that reminds me of, is House of Hunger, I think, is...
I like that, because that's another one where the feeding is, like, a point of intimacy between, like, the two of them.
Yes, it's very much... Yeah, it's coupled with, like, very intimate scenes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, I like that. Because that's the whole point of vampires, is, like, when it really blurs those lines of, like... I like you, but you're killing my friends is, like, a crazy thing to be going through in those times.
Yeah. I mean, that's the allure of Natalie Wynn on her YouTube channel ContraPoints did a really, really amazing video on the romance genre as a whole, but she really digs into Twilight and why people enjoy this specific genre, the specific dynamic in romance stories of a very big, powerful person who can kill you but chooses not to, and the other counterpart is, like, some sort of docile, submissive person who, because in society we're so often told that, you can't take agency over your body, you don't have ownership over your sexuality. If you are, you're raised that, like, oftentimes women are raised to believe, sexuality is something that happens to you, that a man does to you. And you're not supposed to want sex, but you are supposed to have sex with men. Mm-hmm. And so within the consequences that oftentimes the way you can enjoy a story that has these physical desire elements is, a story in which the decision is taken away from you, but it still happens. The thing you want to have happen, the sex with the big, strong person, happens, but, like, you don't have to actively communicate that you want it. They just magically know what you want, and it happens to you. So it happens in the way society wants, but you also get what you want, and you get the dangerous person.
It is also, too, like, with a lot of those things where they have, like, the docile person, I feel like a lot of that, too, is, like, this person has no experiences, so they have no baseline. So that person, like, this older creature, whatever, is showing them their baseline, and they just have no concept for what that could even be. So that's one thing. I also think it's interesting where, like, we were just saying that, like, a lot of these vampires represent aristocrats. I feel like, I don't know, maybe that thought of, like, everything's out of my control, and here's this, like, big scary person who, like, controls everything, but doesn't hurt me, is, like, taking back that part of, like, life you can't control.
I'm special, too, is that. Yeah. And it's also, like, it's the fantasy of being taken care of by someone who has the power to do anything. So by being in a relationship with them, you have the power to do anything.
That's what it was. That was the point. I forgot to write it down, but I was going to mention about, like, the Vampire Diaries. The way that these, like, sexy vampires who don't even look like demons anymore, to me it reads a lot more like the way Greek gods are depicted, where they are these, like, very powerful beings, but they come down and play with humans every now and again. Except a lot of times, like, in modern vampire things, they're seen a little bit more like they care and get more invested in, like, people than Greek gods did, but the same way of, like, the vampires turning people and, like, leaving them behind, like, poor Caroline in Vampire Diaries, is very similar to the way that, like, the gods used to just, like, wager on people and use them in their own games. So then I guess that's part of, that might be why people really like stories of Greek gods, too. And, like, that thought.
Yeah. I mean, it's why billionaires and mafia bosses are so popular right now.
Yeah.
And why, like, often, I mean, there's also the dynamic of oftentimes when you have a lesbian vampire, you know, the lesbian vampire is the one in the relationship dynamic who's big and powerful and controlling, and then you have like another woman who's taken by her, and then that also plays into like, sometimes it plays into the stereotype of like the predatory lesbian, but also gives agency to queer women to be able to express sexuality when society so often, like, again, is heteronormative and homophobic. But it's within a dynamic that's both in both sides, where you have like the docile woman and the powerful man, and the like predatory lesbian vampire and the ingenue.
Yeah.
Is you have that element of like the docile woman or the ingenue, like she wants to have this relationship, but she can't express that without being labeled a bad woman. So it's up to the big powerful vampire to come in and like be the big powerful vampire and do what vampires do.
Right, because it's out of her control.
I guess I'll just take this to mention also one of the original old classic Gothic novels is Carmella, which has been retold and redone. I'm currently reading Hungerstone by Kat Dunn, another cat.
So many cats.
That's the theme of it's the theme of this episode. But yeah,
the theme of this episode is we can remember nobody's name.
The theme is there's a lot of women named Kat out there.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's original Carmella obviously is like, oh, this lady is taken by the lesbian vampire, so then the lesbian vampire has to die. But of course that gets retold. And, like, there was the YouTube web series, which, you know, changes it so they have, spoilers, a happily ever after. I don't know how Hungerstone ends, but I just wanted to note that history there for a moment.
I remembered what I was going to say. Was,
Yay!
As I was researching, another thing that came up is one of the other fascinations with vampires is this idea, because we have, as the human race, we have this like ego that tells us we are the apex predator, when this is something that we cannot comprehend, that doesn't have emotions like we do, that preys on us. So that's another element to it as well. And I think that also plays into that, like, I'm special, that the apex predator, you know, I guess plays with his food or whatever and, like, chose me.
Yeah.
Pick me. Choose me. Did you catch that? You didn't watch Grey's Anatomy, did you?
Sarah.
No.
Do I seem like... No!
I just thought maybe you'd at least have seen the scene, because that's where the term pick me comes from.
I've seen, like, some clips come up on TikTok every once in a while, but...
Because that bad bitch who was a doctor stood in front of that man like she was a piece of clothing in his closet and said, pick me, choose me.
I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him to love her. I've seen that movie.
But that was like British miscommunication. You know,
how much of this vampire lore really is just British miscommunication? Because, I mean, well, actually, I think Bram Stoker was Irish, so that doesn't count.
Oh.
Irish miscommunication.
But, like, Nosferatu, I mean, I guess they're supposed to be German.
German miscommunication. Well, Germans are very blunt.
So that was the other thing about both of those movies, is, like, I don't want to get too into the weeds of this.
Yeah.
I love and respect John Malkovich.
Yeah.
I think he's incredibly talented. I'm not convinced he can do a German accent. And I thought it was bizarre that they cast these people in this film that is set in 1920s Germany, and they speak English with German accents.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the new Nosferatu, I could get into that a little bit more, but I guess they were in a town in Germany and they all had British accents.
I mean, they do that in Russia. Any movie set in Russia, they all just have British accents there. It's just, if you're an American and you need to make a movie set in Europe, everyone's just British.
Yeah. Except for Nosferatu, because they had Bill Skarsgård and he just, like, showed up and did his Bill Skarsgård thing.
Yeah. I mean,
he's, like, tall and gangly and just is kind of scary and, like, I don't know. He's got, like, when I see him in interviews, I'm like, damn, that guy has really good bone structure. And then when, like, I see him in movies, I'm like, oh, that same bone structure is threatening to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of good ground on vampires and the different societal dynamics that come into play with these stories and the different ways people have told the story in many different time periods and cultural contexts. Do you have any final thoughts on vampires?
I do. I need to... I don't remember if I said this on the show. I have said this in my personal life. And after seeing Shadow of the Vampire, I need to retract a statement I made. Okay. That I don't generally find blonde men attractive. Because Carrie Elways in the 90s was incredibly attractive. So I just need to issue a formal retraction of that statement. Because I frankly forgot about that man. And I saw that movie and I thought, sorry, I can't believe you wrote off blonde men like that.
Yeah.
So I need to make that statement. In general, I just think everyone was more attractive in movies in the 90s and early 2000s. They looked more like people. And less like vampire monsters. So I think I learned a lot about myself when watching these movies and thinking about, like, my place in society. And also, there was a point in the new Nosferatu, because, like, we've been talking, you know, I feel like currently Gen Z is going very conservative, and we're in a bit of this place, like, I was about to say, I don't know if you saw it, you did not see that Bad Bunny just did a Calvin Klein campaign. He looked fucking incredible.
I'll take your word for it.
And I saw some people... Yeah, it's not for you, but it's very much for me. And
I'm happy for you.
I saw this. Thank you. It was incredible. I instantly sent it to a lot of my friends. So I saw a discussion about this in being like, I just don't want to see a man in tighty whities. I don't know. I like Jungkook's because that one, he was wearing more clothes. And there were parts of Nosferatu where I was like, why are we being so freaky with the feeding on each other's blood? And I had to be like, girl,
it's vampires.
You are watching Bill Skarsgård feed on people. It's horny. And also, get into it.
It's vampire. Yeah, I saw people reacting. I saw, like, the teenagers and young 20-somethings reacting to Nosferatu and being like, it has sex in it and penis. And it's like, okay, there's lots of that out there, you know.
They also made such a mountain out of the penis molehill. It really was not, like, the way people were talking about it. I was, like, going into that movie thinking, this is gonna be freaky as fuck. And, like, it was just very thematically sensual. Like, it was horny in some places, but even in the one scene they were talking about, I was kind of like, now, why did y'all film my TikTok For You page with this conversation now that I've seen it?
And, like,
it's really not that crazy.
That might be a conversation for another day about... But yeah, I agree. I feel like young people are getting way too uncomfortable with depictions of just the human body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, as I watched Nosferatu, that was something that I thought of and I confronted about myself too, where I was like, what's going on here? And I realized that I was feeling some of that societal shame that was being displayed in the film as I was watching it. And I was like, just watch it. Just let it be art. Let it be sexy. Let it be dark. Let it appeal to that, like, dark side. That's what it is. It's supposed to be this exploration of the occult and the unnatural and, you know, the, like, deepest, darkest desires. Like, she literally says Nosferatu is my shame. And, like, shame is so very powerful in letting go of some of these, like, societal things and just saying, like, you know what? I really liked seeing Bad Bunny in his tighty whities.
Good for you.
And I'm sorry that you didn't, but also not lost on me that the first person you're having this conversation about is a Puerto Rican man and not a white guy.
You know, that's so true. And I love seeing Jessica Chastain be a crazy, evil person in Crimson Peak.
Love it.
I love her. Yeah.
She should be in an adaptation of Carmella.
She should. Yes.
We need to make it happen.
Jessica, if you're listening. Jessica Chastain, hello?
Jessica, if you're listening, please.
But yeah, that's all I have on vampires. And
yeah, that's definitely all I have on them. I've talked a lot about them.
This has been Are You Seeing This? I am Mel.
And I am Sarah.
Have a good night or whatever, wherever you are. Bye.
Just enjoy yourself. Go be horny. Enjoy life.
Yeah. Go, if you're into men, check out Bad Bunny and Calvin Klein. If you're not, if you're into women, check out Crimson Peak. Thank you. Yes. Have a good night.